Well, thank you, Kristen, for stopping by. I appreciate you coming by during the day and having a look at our front yard. I value your opinion on what you might suggest on putting in our yard.
All right, I'm glad it all worked out. I've got it narrowed down to probably my favorite option out of all the ones we previously talked about, and Ohio Buckeye is the one that I would go with for sure. Are you familiar with it? Does that sound like a tree that you've heard of before?
I might have heard of it and seen it through the park system that's behind our house, and I'd love it if you could tell me more about the tree.
Oh, absolutely. So when we think about Ohio Buckeye, I've got some pictures, hopefully, because it's dark outside, pretty hard to take a walk through the park and figure it all out.
That always helps.
So, shape looks like that. So kind of your traditional tree look, right? If you asked a kindergarten kid to draw a tree, that's exactly what it would look like. So you're looking at kind of a rounded form. It's got a low canopy, meaning that there isn't a lot of space between, the ground and where those bottom branches are. If you think that's going to be a problem in the spot that you're thinking about, not to worry, you can always prune up those lower branches if they get in the way. It's also got some really funky features. So we've got our bark. This is what it looks like when it gets to be mature. So we have kind of, light gray, light brown, depending on how you look at it. Turns flaky as it gets older, so that's kind of an interesting texture in the garden. In the springtime, the buds come out, and it's probably hard to see in this little picture, but I've got this little one here in the middle. So they've got big, big buds that come out, 2 of them. I don't know, it looks kind of interesting in the winter. Flowers are absolutely, I think, its most redeeming feature. Let me find the close-up.
Ooh, that's
Stunning.
fun.
Yeah, stunning. So they're kind of a yellowy green tinge with those little hints of red. Very popular with pollinators, and the more bees and pollinators we have in our yards, the better off we all are. And they look a little bit like orchids when you look at them close up. So a little bit of a fragrance, not anything that's highly noticeable, but a little bit of a fragrance. They've also got, to go along with those flowers, really interesting palm-shaped leaves. So if you look around the neighborhood, not too many other trees that are going to have those big palm-shaped leaves.
So we'll stand out in the crowd.
Absolutely. And it's also got, from a design perspective, it's got a coarse texture to it. So if you've got lots of little grassy plants or little finer textured plants, it's a really good contrast from a design perspective. Not to mention flowers, but also, hence the Buckeye name. So we've got our seed pods, a little prickly on the outside, but certainly not a huge issue. They do fall from the tree, so it could be a little bit messy for cleanup, but to me the color and the contrast is kind of amazing. Absolutely. And besides, you can also use them in all of your dried arrangements. And lastly, before we think about the green color, this is what we've got in the fall. So we've got bright, yellowy, coppery luminescence to the whole tree. And it's kind of hard to find that orangey, yellowy color in our climate.
Favorite time of the year when the leaves change.
I know, right?
Now, how much sun does this tree typically need? Because in our front yard, we are facing in a certain direction. So.
We have got almost no restrictions on sun or shade. So that, to me, is also another great feature. It'll take full sun, it'll take partial shade. Really, really flexible.
Now, we don't have a watering system in the front, so
Right.
How much water does it need?
Well, I mean, like any new planting, you want to make sure you water it really well. Put the hose on a low trickle for half an hour, 40 minutes. You want an inch or 2 per week as it gets established. So say established is 3 or 4 years. After that, you're looking at just watering when the weather's really dry. So.
Now, before we plant, this is a brand new builder's house, so we've got builder clay. And should we replace that clay with better soil?
I don't know about replace. I mean, they're not entirely fussy about where they are as far as soil or pH, but when you've got a new plant going in, always a good idea to invest in some compost or some sea soil, a couple of bags worth, so that when you dig out your hole, You put in your new compost, mix it all together so that you don't have this solid mass of good stuff. Because if you were a tree, you probably wouldn't want to grow through the good stuff. You just want to stay in the happy spot. So you just mix it up.
Okay.
Not a bad idea. A couple of bags will save the longevity of your tree.
Okay. Now mulch though, is that something that you recommend after everything has been planted and settled in?
Yeah, better to do that afterwards, you know, just in case if it's a brand new flower bed or a new area, you want to make sure the ground is leveled and settled a little bit. But certainly a couple of inches of mulch is beneficial, especially in Calgary.
Okay. Now I grew up in Regina with Dutch elm disease and scared of some trees having diseases. Is this one susceptible to any bugs or diseases?
Luckily, no. I mean, there's been a couple of incidences of scale, so kind of like a little sticky insect. But based on my own experience, relatively pest and disease free. You want to really, it's a little bit prone to foliage disorders, so you might get a little bit of gray powdery mildew on there, a little bit of leaf scorch if it's not getting enough water. So you want to make sure it's watered regularly to keep its defenses up.
So nothing to terribly concern ourselves about. You did mention in one of your photos there about the growth. Is pruning necessary, or is it something that we can just let it go wild?
You could certainly let it go wild. It's not a very fast growing tree, so you've got lots of time to kind of consider things. You always, with pruning with this guy, because it's not susceptible to a lot of diseases, you can just prune for shape, or anything that's, you know, broken, you want to take that off. Anything, you know, any branches that start rubbing together, you want to remove those. Nothing complicated, nothing you need to take a course for.
Okay, so as you saw, we have a fairly narrow front yard. What is the growth rate of this tree, and what's the expected total growth?
Well, I mean, that's hard to say. It's going to depend on weather and climate. It's, like I said, sort of medium to slow growing. So you're looking at 3 or 4 inches a year max.
Okay. Any negatives towards the tree? Again, we talked about bugs, we talked about other things, but any negatives that you've heard of?
You know, it's only because it's such a long-lived tree. Let's start with its root system first of all. So it's got a really strong, solid, deep root system, which is what makes it so tolerant to pests and diseases and changes in weather and environmental conditions. With that though, I would really consider before you start planting exactly where it's going to go. It's not the kind of tree that you can just put in and then decide you don't like it and dig it up and move it somewhere else. It's probably better to sort of figure out where you want it first of all, and then you're not going to risk the health.
And that's why I have you here for my help.
You've also got to think about those, as far as negatives are concerned, those little seed husks, these little guys. So they're kind of messy, kind of prickly, and poisonous. So I would be careful if you've got dogs or animals or over. You just want to make sure that you watch them. You know, it is a poisonous tree, but I think the benefits of its flowers and everything certainly outweigh that.
Yeah, well, that is a concern because we do have dogs, but that's a good note to have. So. Good. Well, it sounds like you've made a fine choice for us, and something that we'll definitely have you explore further with us.
Well, I think if you're looking for minimal maintenance, unique foliage, and really colorful flowers and funky nuts, I mean, that's certainly a tree that, yeah, we can talk about it further and go look at some samples in the garden center.
Perfect. Sounds like a winner for us. Thanks, Kristen.
Okay, thanks so much.